Hi, it's just me this time, all by myself. I don't have a partner, um, but we will carry forward. So, if you could say hello and tell me where you're from in the comments. While I stare into space. So I should warn you, all of you viewers, today we'll be talking about interviews and being prepared for an interview and preparing for other things like a date maybe or other events. So we will talk about interview tips and giving advice. Now, let me go to the slides right now. Our focus activity is called Be Prepared. And you'll be giving advice and preparing for an occasion. And also, we'll be learning a bit about modals. If you don't know anything about modal verbs, hi, one person, say hello, tell me where you're from. Modal verbs are things like can, should, would, will, can, should, will, may, and might. They are verbs that modify a another verb to show ability, to show probability, to give advice, or to um, make a rule, to make something more firm. And so today, let me go to the next slide. So I'm late. I'm late. In your opinion, what's the worst mistake that someone can make when attending a job interview? What's the worst mistake that someone can make when attending a job interview? I think, generally speaking, there are quite a number of mistakes that you can make in a job interview. For example, not being prepared might be one. Not researching the job or researching the company. Dressing poorly. That's a common one, I think, dressing poorly in the sense that you should always dress well for an interview, don't you think? Maybe even a little more formal than the interview calls for. So if you go to an interview and you are talking to people, you are not considered slovenly. Slovenly, another word for that is unkempt, but it also could be mm, not tidy. It means dress poorly. And since it's just me talking to myself here until someone shows up, have I ever made any mistakes in an interview, not being prepared, not researching the company, dressing poorly? The truth? No, I always do my research. I always research the company and research the job. Do I dress poorly? I try not to. I try to dress well for an interview. But I have noticed that when dressing for an interview, I think I dress pretty well in general, but the only time that I feel like I have nothing nice to wear and nothing appropriate for the occasion is when I have an interview. And I don't know why that is, that only at an interview do all my clothes seem wrinkled or covered in lint. Wrinkled is in fabric when it's creased, when it's not has not been ironed. Lint are the little pieces of dust that can cover clothes quite commonly. I would love to hear from you, but I have no viewers. It's just me talking to myself. If you are watching this later on, hi, it's nice to meet you. My name is Shelley. I'm from San Francisco, California, and I now live in Milan and teach at the Milano Filzi Mayes School. It's really nice to meet you. Feel free, even though this is over, to talk about your own interview experiences. Like, have you ever been late to an interview? That's actually a fun question that you can ask friends at parties. Have you ever been late to a job interview? Because I've noticed that with things like job interviews or auditions, which I've also done, an audition is a job interview for a model or an actor, um, that everything works fine most days, except on the day when you have an interview. So generally, I like to try to plan at least a half hour of time so that I cannot arrive late in case something terrible happens. And that's the day that the metro will be on strike, for example. For example, that's the day that your car won't start. That's the day that you've got a flat tire. So strike is when workers refuse to work in order to bargain for something like higher pay and benefits. Uh, your car won't start. That means that when you turn the key, nothing happens. Or a flat tire. A tire is the wheel of a car. It's when it's ruptured and the air comes out. So the tire, which has air inside, goes flat. And those are my explanations. So strike, when your car won't start, flat tire. You can scroll through these in the comments if you're reviewing this later on. So do's and don'ts. When preparing for an interview, there are a few important things to remember. You should always go over potential interview questions and practice your answers. You ought to dress nicely. Unless you live in Hawaii, you had better not turn up to an interview in shorts and a t-shirt. It's also a good idea to keep up with recent events in the company you're applying to. By doing this, you will come across as a knowledgeable, intelligent candidate. Remember, first impressions are very important. So follow these steps to make sure that you stand out from the crowd. I see a lot of modals and semi-modals, which tells me that this is giving advice. So you should Always. Giving advice, we use should. We use ought to. If you spot any more, you're smarter than I am at the moment. Giving advice, should and ought to. So you should always go over potential interview questions and practice your answers. So potential interview questions. What are some potential interview questions? I'm going to go to my friend Google and ask. Interview questions, common. So here's one. Tell me a little about yourself. This is where you tell your interviewer. You tell your interviewer about yourself, how you got into the industry. Past jobs, education, where you're from. Industry is like, for example, at the moment, my industry is teaching. I teach a foreign language. In the past, I've had roles in the legal industry, in the tech industry, and in the retail industry. These are all industries. So when you say something different, like the company I am applying for is marketing, the job I am applying for is marketing. No, it is the industry I'm applying for. I'm looking for a job in the marketing industry. I'm looking for a role. Role is another word for job. Another common interview question. And I don't always agree with some of these interview questions, but you will be very surprised how often interviewers don't know what to prepare. So they do what I'm doing and they Google top interview questions. This question is important. Out of all candidates, why should we hire you? Now, a job interviewer will never ask this question outright, in my experience. However, I do think that it is a question that you should answer for yourself. My advice to you is that you answer this question. You should answer this question. So out of all of the other candidates that we're looking at, why should we hire you? And you can answer this in many ways, but in general, everything that you're doing in that interview comes down to this one question. It's the most important. Why should anyone consider you specifically for this job? What is it about you that is special, that stands out from the crowd, that makes you a better candidate? Other questions? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I always have trouble with this question because I see myself in 5 years not where I am. My answer is usually something career motivated. For example, in 5 years, I see myself in a role at um, an agency creating content, for example, creating content for the social media industry. I see myself as working in the food industry. I see myself as a sous chef, where you see yourself very career motivated. The truth of the matter is that in 5 years, every time I think about it, I imagine myself on a beach with a drink, just in the sun. That is where I really want to be in 5 years. How do I get there in 5 years? It has not happened yet. I've had very many 5 year intervals in my job industry history. So there are a couple questions that you get asked very often, and they're like the worst questions you could possibly have. What are your strengths and weaknesses? That can be phrased like, tell me, what are your strengths? And then again, tell me, what are your weaknesses? And I disagree with this question. If you are a person who does job interviews, you are looking to hire someone, don't ask them this question because they're going to tell you good things about themselves. My strengths are that I'm organized. My strengths are that I'm flexible. I work well on a team. They're always going to say that. Um, if it's a very technical job, what you need is experience, usually, or the capacity for someone to be able to learn what you need them to do if they're not experienced enough. Um, and asking someone what their strengths might be, they're going to tell you something that's what you want to hear, which is not necessarily it's not necessarily a good interview question because of that, because you're just wasting time because you didn't prepare. That's what it tells me when someone asks me in an interview, what are your strengths and your weaknesses? No, no. I think, oh God, this person did not do anything other than check the top interview questions. My weaknesses are that I know too much. The weaknesses are that are that I'm a little judgmental because it's the truth, I think. I think you might have an argument that the strengths and weaknesses question is a good one. Mm, no, there are better ways to figure out a person's strengths and a person's weaknesses. So let's see if I can find other fun interview questions and then we'll continue on with the slide. How did you hear about this position? That is a common one and a good one. How did you hear about this position? Uh, was it was it a referral on the jobs/career page for the website, the company website? LinkedIn? A referral is when someone tells you about it, someone who works for the company maybe, or someone who is familiar with the company, um, and they tell you, "Oh, I know of a job that's open." Other good questions. Tell me about a challenge or conflict you faced at work and how you dealt with it. This is a very common one. I think in probably 50% of the interviews I've done, this has been a question. So tell me about a challenge or conflict that you faced at work and how you dealt with it. So, challenge or conflict you faced at work. These can be any sort of challenge or conflict. For example, with another person, they want to hear how you solve problems. So, interpersonal problems with other people, between yourself and other people, or a challenge, for example, how you resolved a problem for the company. So, or they want to know how you resolved a problem for the company or how you deal with other people. In this question, this is how you find out a person's strengths and weaknesses, their ability to be prepared in a crisis situation, their ability to deal with other people, having strong interpersonal skills. Why are you leaving your current job? And it's common. And it's a good question to ask if you're hiring. Why are you leaving your current job? Because if they tell you a lot of things that are bad about the company, you might not want to hire them. If they tell you that they are looking for a role to expand their skill set, to learn something, uh, to get to work with certain types of people in your company, to because they like certain aspects of your software, yeah, be prepared with this question. All right, so I'm going to go back to the slide because I have gone down a detour. A detour is when you turn a different direction from the conversation. So back to our slide about being prepared. Find a phrasal verb in the text which means to arrive. I will give you a few seconds. To arrive. To turn up. You had better. That's another advice. So had better. Giving advice. You had better. But it's very strong advice. You'd better not turn up to an interview in shorts and a t-shirt. You better not arrive to your interview in shorts and a t-shirt. To review. To review. Look for the phrasal verb, which means to review. Did you guess it? It is to go over. To review is to go over. So you should always go over potential interview questions. For example, the interview questions that I just gave you are very good questions that to answer, except for the one, strengths and weaknesses. You should know your answer, but be more prepared for the other questions. So now, to give a certain impression. To give a certain impression. To come across as. By doing this, you will come across as a knowledgeable, intelligent candidate. Come across as. That one's a bit of a hard one. To give a certain impression is to come across as. To be different. To be different. And this one's a common one. I think you'll get it very quickly. Is to stand out. Make sure you stand out from the crowd by being prepared, by being an excellent candidate. Be up to date. Be up to date. Keep up with. To be up to date is to keep up with. It's a good idea to keep up with recent events in the company you're applying to. Now let's go back over again. Some of the modals and semi-modals for giving advice or obligation. Should, ought to, for advice. For obligation, so very, very strong advice, I would say. Is that's a semi-modal, obligation semi-modal. Had better, slash had better not. You'd better not. So advice modals should and ought to. Obligations semi-modal. Had better or negative, had better not. You'd better not turn up in short sleeves and shorts. Even in Hawaii. I imagine that in Hawaii, it might be more acceptable to wear short sleeves. Short sleeves are like my shirt right now. Can you see? They are cut short. So short sleeves are common, but you still have to wear pants, not shorts, to an interview in Hawaii. I cannot confirm that, but I am fairly certain this is true. They have air conditioning in Hawaii. Unlike here. Unlike here. So do's and don'ts. Now, if you are following along later on, I'm going to read this and you can put in the correct answer. So I'm going to read it once without the answers in, and then I will read it again with the answers. So you'll have a chance to do this on your own, which I sincerely hope you're doing. Although I do like talking to myself. I really do. This is too much fun for me. It really sucks that my topic is about interviews and being prepared, though. I would like to talk about other things like celebrity gossip and conspiracy theories about aliens. Do's and don'ts. A well-written CV will help you from the other candidates. You should never late to an interview. You ought to the information on your CV to make sure it is correct and up to date. In order to be a good candidate, you must new developments in your industry. Pay attention to your body language. Sit up straight. Make eye contact. Eye contact. Smile and don't fidget like I'm doing. You can't see as much that I'm fidgeting, but fidgeting is moving. It's twirling your hair. It's tapping your foot. It's moving a lot. Fidgeting. I don't know how I can show it on camera better. But to fidget is like when someone always touches their hair like this. So fidget. You can also tap on things. I don't know if you can hear this. That's fidgeting. When someone plays with a pen like this, or when they click it. Now you're annoyed. Fidget. This will help you confident and proud. So a well-written CV will help you to stand out from the other candidates. We also call a CV a resume. It's very common in the United States anyway, whereas the rest of the world seems to want a CV. I just had an out-of-body experience, like, wait, if no one is commenting, did the tree fall in the forest? You should never turn up late to an interview. You should never turn up late to an interview. Always plan extra time. Always plan other things. Excuse me, other things so that you're able to get to the interview on time or a little early. You ought to go over the information on your CV to make sure it is correct and up to date. Now, I see a lot of typos on resumes, especially I see them on my own resume, but I try to keep them out. I see them on my friends' resumes quite often. Typo is a mistake. So go over the information on your CV, make sure it is correct and up to date, and don't apply for a job as an editor with a typo in your resume. I may have done that. So in order to be a good candidate, you must, if you can guess, you must keep up with new developments in your industry. So new developments in your industry is industry news. So if you work for a bank, you are in the banking industry. If you work for an agency, you are in the marketing industry or just marketing. And finance is another industry, and so on and so forth. So industry news, developments in your industry. Pay attention to your body language. Sit up straight, make eye contact, smile, and don't fidget. This will help you come across as confident and focused. Did you guess all of them? So stand out, turn up, go over, keep up with, and come across. Great job, one viewer. Personal questions. Number one, what do you think makes people stand out in an interview? Number two, have you ever turned up late to an important event? Number three, do you often go over possible questions before an interview? Number four, is it better to come across as excited and eager or quiet and confident? And number five, why is it important to keep up with new developments in your industry? So number one, what do you think makes people stand out in an interview? You probably already can guess the normal answers. A person should be neat, should dress well, should be tidy. A person also stands out when they're different from all the other applicants. So they might come from a different background. They might have a different way of thinking. If you fidget, means moving too much. Like this, when people do this, when they click their pen, that's what fidget means, Tony. And welcome. So have you ever turned up late to an important event? Bye, Tony. Have you ever turned up late to an important event? I have not, because that's not in my personality to turn up late for an important event. However, if I am riding with someone else and they make me late, that's another thing. Do you often go over possible questions before an interview? Yes, and I think everyone should. There's that modal should. I think everyone should. Is it better to come across as excited and eager or quiet and confident? So excited and eager or quiet and confident? I think both. I think do you. Oh, we have one answer. Personality. So number one, your personality makes you stand out in an interview. Exactly. Now tell me in the comments, guys, is it better, do you think, to be excited and eager or quiet and confident? I think that a person should be themselves in an interview. It is easier to get the job if you are confident, but not everyone is. And then there's number five. Why is it important to keep up with new developments in your industry? Why is it important? Especially when you're looking for a new job. Why? I will wait for some answers. Please do type. Yeah. As much as I like talking to myself, I'd love to talk with you. So, keeping up with new developments in your industry, it's important, especially when you're looking for a new job, to know what you're getting into, to know what is going on in the industry you're applying for, especially in the country you're applying. For example, if you're if you know that a competitor has done something crazy and gotten a lot of new customers as a result, maybe uh, they've released a new product. It's good to know why their product is so popular and what the other company that you're applying to might do better. I might say. Um, to know about these things before going into an interview, it does help. Although I do find that in order to waste time in an interview, the person hiring you will tell you. They'll tell you about all of the developments in the industry. They'll tell you everything about the company. They'll give you all of that information and try and walk you through it, bef- even though you've done that. Even though you've done that research, even though you are familiar with what is going on in the industry. Like that's one thing that people forget, that people who do interviews are they're people, and often they have to take an hour or two out of their day just to talk to you, and so they're not prepared necessarily for for the interview. They just want to get to know whether or not they like you, whether or not they think you're competent, whether or not they think you're um, a quality candidate, whether they want to work with you. And so often being prepared helps, but also knowing what questions to ask uh, as part of those new developments in your industry, like as part of your knowledge, know what questions to ask in an interview. I'm going to use the modal. You should know what questions to ask in an interview if you're a candidate. So for example, you're a candidate and you go in and you notice that the company that is about to hire you just received a round of funding. This is common in the startup world, a round of funding. A round of funding is when they get investor money in order to hire. You should know that what their competitors are doing. You should know what the industry is looking like, whether it's trending, going up, or whether it is declining, going down. Declining, or I would say on the decline. I see myself on a beach in 10 years. So if Tony says you shouldn't talk about very personal issues in your life, the interviewer is not a psychologist. Exactly. And in 10 years, I see myself on a beach with a cocktail. That is what I'm going to do. And everything I can do in my career to make that happen, I will do. Where do you see yourselves in 10 years, guys? Let me type that out. Ah, so we've talked about modal verbs just a little bit. I may have talked to myself quite a lot about modal verbs. Um, but this is a fun one. In the comments, if you could, tell me how you should dress for an interview. Should is the modal for giving advice. Something you had better not say in an interview. And let me, while you answer the question, but also I'm going to take that down and put up what I had written before. So advice modals are should and ought to. Ought to is a semi-modal. Semi-modal is just it's more than one verb. It's a verb phrase that functions the same as a modal. An obligation, had better, and had better not. So advice is should. Something you don't have to bring to an interview. Something you had better not say, obligation, you'd better not say in an interview. Something you don't have to bring to an interview. Something you ought to do, mustn't do, should do, and have got to bring. These have a lot of different meanings, don't they? Had better is for obligation. Should is advice. So it's strong advice. Often they're used the same way. But in general, when you say you should work out more, you should eat more vegetables, it's advice. It's understood as not mandatory. If you say had better, there's a good reason. If you don't follow what someone says you had better do, something bad will happen. So you had better cut your hair before an interview, otherwise you'll look untidy. Confused? What about? Let me know. So we have modal verbs for, let me try and think of another way. So obligation means you have to do something. So must, had better, and have to. These are obligations. So it's telling someone that they really need to do something. It's a rule that they should follow. Should is at giving advice. Ah, yes, exactly. Had better not drink before driving. Had better not is the negative of had better. But yeah, exactly. Must is usually a written rule. So you must not drink before driving. It might be written in a bar or as part of like laws. Usually must is you must take the stairs. You must not run near a swimming pool. And then giving advice is should, ought to. The negative of ought to is shouldn't. You're welcome. So we don't use the negative ought to, only in positive. You should or shouldn't, and you ought to. Those are giving advice. So it's understood that they're not mandatory, that they're not rules you must follow. Ah, you have got to. Yes, exactly. You mustn't walk on the grass. Exactly. Obligation. You mustn't walk on the grass. And then I forgot one in advice. You have got to. You've got to. Although I have to check and make sure in my curriculum that have got to might be obligation. I think it's advice. Like you've got to. No. Yeah, you've got to. It's very strong advice. Yes, exactly. You got it. Thank you. So, advice here. How should you dress for an interview? Your response? So, how should you dress for an interview? Another advice, something you should do before an interview. What should you do before an interview? These are modal questions. How should you? what should you do? So how should you, verb, dress? With modals, we use the bare infinitive. Like, I gotta go. You've got to. Yeah, that's literally it. I've got to go. It's a statement. It's not really. It can be obligation, but it's generally a statement that's like, this is necessary to happen. So I've corrected myself. That is, you've got to is obligation. In I gotta go, you're obligating yourself to go. You're telling everyone, I obligate myself to leave. Right. Exactly. You should read information about the company before the interview. Yeah. Like giving advice, you should. That is how you answer. So the questions, how should you dress? What should you do? You use a modal. So modal plus bare infinitive. How should you dress? What should you do? These are bare infinitives. Other examples, these are stronger. So something you ought to do before an interview, mustn't do. Do they mean different things? Ought to do and mustn't do? Tell me what you think. Do ought to and mustn't mean different things? Ought to is giving advice like should. Mustn't is an obligation. So something you mustn't do is something you must not do. Like you must never, ever, ever go to an interview without pants. Unless you're wearing a dress. That's must not. Must not. Something you ought to do, though, something you is something you should or should not do is advice. You really shouldn't fidget. Don't fidget during an interview. You really shouldn't. Which is stronger, ought to or should? They are, in my opinion, they're both equal. Um, you can think of it as ought to is general advice. Should is personal advice. Although they can be used equally. So if you are going to choose between one or the other and you decide that you only want to use should, that's fine, just use should. If you want to start using ought to, it means the same thing as should, but they have slightly different meanings, very slight. Like, I don't think an average English speaker would be able to tell you this. Annoying. Fidgeting, noun. We use the gerund, so fidgeting annoys me a lot. Exactly. So you switch. Fidgeting becomes a noun when you added ing in this situation, and then annoys, the third person present simple. It's not my cup of tea. Exactly. Nice one. Ah, you work for a job agency. These people have an interview coming up. Give them some advice to help them be at their best. What could they do differently? Oh, wow, is it already 8:50? That's I did not realize that the time went by so quickly. Yeah. Bye, Tony. It was nice to see you. And to anyone else watching this later on, dear, I hope you learned modals. I hope you enjoyed your time filling in the blanks on your own. And hope to see you for another webinar. Bye.